In this video, I'm going to tell you what it was like to do hypoxic altitude training at home for 300 hours. Subscribe to the Slow Boat Sailing channel. We give you the secrets to crush your outdoor adventure. Alright, so if you've got an objective, say over 5,000 meters, and you live at low altitude or moderate altitude, it takes a long time to get ready, even to get to the base camp or even before the base camp, to get your body so that you're not going to be at high risk of altitude sickness. So I use this generator. I guess I can't lift it up, it's moving around here. It's about 60 pounds. I guess I could, but... And we also have a bag associated with it, and a mask, and I got the tent. So this is like the fourth video in this series, probably the last video in this series. And then if you want to see the results of, the objective, I would say just subscribe, because we'll have a vlog series, and I'm sure I'll reference this altitude training and how effective I thought it was on the mountain. But I think there's a number of lessons learned just from what I was doing. So it was a 30-day program, and I spent about 30% of the time in a mask, using the mask on my face, hooked up to the generator, pumping out low percent oxygen air, and I was usually standing or sitting, but not walking. So I very rarely did I actually turn on the treadmill while I was doing that. And then one of the big lessons for me was there was a big gap between, especially when we got to about halfway through the program, between the sleeping altitude and the mask altitude. So the mask was not really hard at all by the end, and I went to the maximum of the generator for the last, as you can see, this bottom, on the bottom corner, we've got this Normobaric altitude generator, 30-day training in meters, and the purple line is the mask altitude where I'm awake, and I was at the max setting, so 9% oxygen. Sometimes the generator was not totally efficient. It would be less than 9% oxygen, but that's equivalent to 21,000, 22,000 feet, over 6,000, 6,500 meters, something like that. But the sleeping altitude became progressively harder to increase, right? So one of the mistakes that I made in this program was not to buy an oxygen sensor. We'll have an Amazon affiliate link for the oxygen sensor in which is a lot cheaper than like Hypoxico. We'll sell you one half off or more. Having an oxygen sensor for the tent, but also for the mask. So the mask, you just put the mask on there, you can tell how much percent oxygen you're getting. But the tent is just so unreliable. You can't rely on the generator settings because, maybe the ambient air in the mask is not going to be, or in the tent is not going to be what the generator is actually putting out, because maybe there's a leak or something. So about halfway through the program, I got that oxygen sensor. There were 2 days. You can see the green line is my sleeping altitude in the bottom corner. Let's see. Nope. I can't get it. It's all opposite. So there we go. Bottom corner. We got the the green line is my sleeping altitude, and that's the one that has the altitude in meters over time. And you can see that I kind of hit a wall around 4,000 meters. That I got to 4,000 meters of sleeping altitude about halfway through the program, and then I really didn't break that, except for like one night I got to 5,000 meters. So at the end, I found like about 4,500 meters of simulated altitude and the corresponding O2 percentages with that. Then there's this issue of, and I came across it when I did the Kilimanjaro trip, was that I and most people, so I actually read the medical literature, and it said almost 100% of people will have something called central apnea, or periodic breathing. So basically your body's system, while you're sleeping, so your involuntary breathing system, relies on the amount of CO2 in the blood. And when you're in a low oxygen environment at altitude, then you're not going to put out much CO2 because you don't have much oxygen. And so the body takes that as a signal that you don't need to breathe, which is the exact wrong signal. And so when you're involuntarily breathing while you're asleep, you're going to like hold your breath for a long time because of the neurological signals, right? Not because you're obstructed, so it's not obstructive sleep apnea, but this central apnea will cause you to wake up, right? Because you wake up gasping for air, right? So there's eventually another system overrides that, and you start gasping for air and wake up. But that really put a ceiling somewhere around 11%, between 11 and 12%, somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 meters for me as to how high I could sleep. And so the only way that I was able to kind of, edge up that sleeping altitude was by taking Diamox, or acetazolamide, so the 125 milligrams twice a day. If you ever go on a guided expedition, almost without fail, the guides will recommend that you get a prescription for acetazolamide, because that's kind of the go-to altitude medication. But it also helps with the central apnea because it puts more CO2 in your blood, and that encourages you to breathe while you're sleeping at higher altitudes. So, while I didn't use it on Kilimanjaro, I would use it on a higher peak if I had to sleep above, 4,500 meters. I would start taking acetazolamide, just because of the central apnea issue, because you just wouldn't get to sleep. So I found that was very interesting. And so if you look at the red line, we're going back to the bottom corner, not where I'm pointing. So in the bottom left-hand corner, the red line in terms of altitude is what Hypoxico recommends to its clients for a 30-day program, that you never exceed 4,000 meters. And I think that's because of the central apnea issue, because they just get so many complaints. Maybe they're aware of the literature, but they probably just get so many complaints from their clients. And if you look at like Kilian Jornet, he has at one point had the fastest known time for Mount Everest, climbing Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. He also says on his blog he does not use any medications whatsoever. So in mountain climbing, there are no rules against using any kind of medications. You can use EPO, you can use whatever you want. Acetazolamide is on the WADA banned list, but I think because Kilian Jornet is also like a trail runner, like he's won some very large trail races in addition to other types of competitions, he just doesn't use any of those banned substances by WADA. So acetazolamide is a diuretic, so it makes you pee a lot, and it's used by wrestlers and boxers, I think, to cut weight, and that's why it's a banned substance. but it's very common for mountaineers to use it, and there are no banned substances in mountaineering. But anyways, he doesn't use that, and he stopped his sleeping altitude when he was doing his Normobaric altitude generator training at 4,000 meters. And I think that the obvious reason why he didn't go higher in terms of sleeping altitude was that the central apnea issue was probably stopping him, just like it's stopping Hypoxico's clients. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there may come a point where your kind of acclimatization is glacially slow to increasing your sleeping altitude without some sort of pharmaceutical intervention. Okay, so the other two graphs are, one are my awake SpO2, that's your blood oxygen while you're at the simulated while I'm at the simulated altitude, and then there's the average, which includes both the nighttime and the daytime. So daytime was about 30% of the time, because I would just like put it on while I'm working on the computer, and then nighttime, in the tent, right? And there's this study, which I'll put a link in, that talks about, what are the ranges of blood oxygen that are likely to be associated with acute mountain sickness, which will slow you down on the mountain, give you headaches, nausea, difficulty sleeping, and potentially inability to breathe, and your brain swelling up till you die. That study said that the red line, if you get below the red line for a given altitude, and then you will, so one thing that's not on these graphs is the altitude I was at. I'm just showing you what the recommended range is. So the red line is the lower bound, green line is the upper bound, and the purple line is what I actually did, right? And you can see that my blood oxygen kind of went off outside that range, the upper and lower range, about midway through the thing. So subsequent to this, I found, and also from my talk with Martin Brewster, the professor, that your blood oxygen actually improves as you acclimatize, right? So as you spend more time at altitude, so like you spend like 7 days, it's not unusual for your SpO2 percent to go up by 5% for a given altitude. So there is that benefit, and you kind of go off this, and you can see I went way off the scale for the mask work I did during the day, where I was at 21,000 feet of simulated altitude, but I still had a 90 blood ox a lot of the time. And then it also went off and that started roughly around day 17, and then roughly around day 19 overall, I kind of went off the range, outside the normal range of mountaineers for that. So I think that's just a kind of indication of that the Normobaric altitude training is effective. But now the final proof is going to be on the mountain. And so I recommend that if you want to see what I did, see how I did after this, then subscribe to Slow Boat Sailing. We do a lot of vlog series about our mountaineering adventures, but also our sailing adventures, and we'll put the mountaineering adventure associated with this up on the channel. Subscribe. Okay, so I realize you're probably going to ask, oh, well, you weren't really training for this. And I said I've been basically training all year long. I did a lot of climbs this year, but when I'm at low altitude, I live at a very low altitude, I run almost every day. So I jog, and then I do 3 to 4 times a week I lift weights. So that's the training. I think before I was doing some step training with a heavy pack. I did a lot of training just like having a heavy pack on prior to Kilimanjaro climb, prior to this climb. I suspended that during this period because I was wearing my mountaineering boots, which have carbon fiber soles, climbing upstairs, and that exacerbated my ITB problems. So kind of like a knee type problem. So I just went back to running and not doing the weights, the weighted packs training. So I think it's going to be different for everyone. You just want to have a high level cardiovascular fitness, but you may not be building that within the altitude training. So, you know, I've run 3 marathons, climbed a lot of mountains. I've been running since I was in 7th grade, right? So I've been a distance runner since then. So I have a high level of cardiovascular fitness going into this, and I continued with my cardiovascular training coming up to the attempt well, but that was not at altitude. Now you can do that. I would say there's not a ton of research saying that being sedentary and having the hypoxic air versus training and having the hypoxic air pumped into you is that much better. But you take your own, do what you can. I personally would do this in addition to whatever cardio training you're doing, whether that's hiking, biking, swimming, running, doing stairs, that type of thing. Obviously, the best training for mountaineering is to go up and down mountains if you can, but in the wintertime, sometimes that's really hard to make progress, or maybe dangerous to make progress like that in mountainous areas. So, for instance, I wanted to climb Wheeler Peak in April. And I was told by the park rangers that there was something like 8 feet of snow on the trail. That it was so high that they thought many of the blue blazes high up on the trees were going to be covered. Now, I climbed Wheeler Peak later on. We've got that video on this channel in the summertime, and it was a piece of cake. You know, I mean, it's not. There's altitude. There's a lot of walking, but it was a lot easier than had I tried it in April in snowshoes. So sometimes you just can't go to the mountain. Sometimes you have to do alternative long endurance training.